Okay, Katharine Hayhoe.
Yes.
We are here in your stomping grounds.
This is Lubbock.
Lubbock, Texas.
Mm-hmm.
And we've been through kind of a long, harsh period here in this part of the country, and especially over the last 2 years. Can you tell us how things are kind of shaping up here now in terms of drought and heat and precipitation, and what it might be telling us and what we might be looking for in coming months or years?
Mm-hmm. That's always the question, because the drought is what hits us with our ag production here. We have a lot of agriculture in this part of the world, and the heat is what hits us too with our water use and even our energy bills. So for much of the eastern part of the country, this past summer of 2012 broke all kinds of records, but for us here in Texas and Oklahoma, the summer before, 2011 was the one that really smashed all of our records. It was the hottest summer ever recorded. We normally have between 9 and 10 days per year over 100 degrees in Lubbock. We're actually very high elevation here. It even snows in the winter. But 2 summers ago in 2011, we had nearly 50 days per year over 100. So the question in everybody's mind is, can we attribute these types of recurring events to climate change or not? And as you know, that's a really tough question for scientists to answer. We're good with the statistics of climate accumulated over 30 years or more, because that's the way we look at climate. So we can certainly talk about how the risks of certain events have changed. We can talk about how certain events are very consistent with what we expect. And so, for example, with the summer that we had in 2011 here in Texas, my projections show that that's consistent with what we would expect within several decades, probably by the middle of the century. That would be the average summer if we continue on our current trajectory. And so that really shows you something, because, I mean, there was people, like I said, who could not pay their electricity bills. The entire crop was wiped out. Our water resources were in desperate shape. So imagine if that were the average summer in 30 or 40 years. That has huge implications for the development of this area. Now, for the specific event, though, you really want to know, well, what did climate change have to do with that? So I've been doing some digging into our historical records to try to figure out what drives drought and heat in our area, just for example, and you could do this in any area of the world. So in our area, some of it's just weather. It's just noise. That's about 40% of the variability in our temperature and precipitation. It's just chaotic weather. About 20% of it is what's going on in the Pacific and the Atlantic Oceans. They affect climate over a large part of the world. So when the stars align, so to speak, when the Pacific and the Atlantic are synced, we get really bad droughts all down the central US. Part of what we see is local conditions where, especially in dry areas like this where we don't have a lot of vegetation, when it gets dry, it gets very hot. When it gets very hot, all of the soil moisture evaporates and it gets even drier. And as it gets even drier, it gets even hotter. So that type of effect really acted to enhance what we saw 2 summers ago here, and probably last summer in the eastern US also. Now, let's talk about climate change. What we see in Texas, for example, is that we see if we go back 60, 70, 80 years, there's no signal of global temperature in our year-to-year variability in temperature and precipitation. It's all remote influences from the Atlantic and Pacific, local weather, and local climate. But now, moving forward 20 years, 30 years, we do see a signal of global temperature emerging as a predictor of year-to-year conditions. Now, it's not as big as the other natural factors yet, but it's there. So it really lends some credence to the idea that whenever we see some extreme event happening, there is a small component of global change in every event, because we have altered the background conditions of our planet.
Okay, you mentioned the Atlantic and Pacific. We're kind of in this El Nino, neither here nor there period right now. Is that something you have any insight on? What are we looking for? If we were heading into an El Nino, which is normally the warmest part of the cycle, what can we expect?
We're looking at a relatively brief and not so strong El Nino. At least that's what the forecasts are for this year. So through the winter, It'll bring more precipitation to the southwestern U.S. and less precipitation to the northwest. And these natural cycles are a really important part of our climate. It's still an open question in climate modeling circles to what extent global change is going to interact with these natural cycles. We know that it will because it's altering the energy balance of the Earth, so it has to have an impact on natural cycles. But that's one of the open areas of research. So for now, when we look at our analyses, we often treat natural cycles as a separate factor, independent of global change. But I think as global change accelerates in the future, we will start to see interactions between these natural cycles like El Nino and global temperature. We just don't know what it is yet.
Okay, now you told me a story just a few minutes ago about what it's like to chat with some of the old-timers, long observers of weather, farmers in this area. And can you just relate what they're telling you and what happens when you kind of dig a little under the surface?
Sure. West Texas is a climate of extremes. We have severe droughts every 20 to 30 years. We also have heavy rainfall events and flooding as well. So people who live in West Texas are used to extremes. They're used to cold and heat. They're used to flood and drought. That's just the way life is. So when I talk to a lot of people around here, often people's first response is, well, we've seen this before. If you're a farmer, you know, my daddy dealt with this 30 years ago. My granddaddy dealt with this 50, 60 years ago. This is what we've always done, and we can survive this because it's just part of the natural cycle of things. But now we're at the point where if we start to dig a little bit deeper with people, I've had a number of people say to me who've lived here for a very long time and whose families come from here, I've had a number of people say, you know, it's true that we've seen these type of events before, but maybe it is a little different. Maybe things are changing a little quicker because our winters are definitely getting a lot warmer. Our precipitation sometimes seems to be getting a bit more variable. It's feast or famine, it's very heavy rainfalls, and then it's drought in between. There might be something different now that we haven't seen before. And we are starting to see these changes. Like I said, the main changes we're seeing in West Texas are, first of all, our winters are getting a lot warmer. Our extreme cold is getting a lot less frequent. Now that might sound like a good thing, but extreme cold is often what keeps a lot of our pests and our invasive species at bay. So when those cold temperature thresholds relax, you see some unwelcome guests moving into the area. The other thing we've seen is we haven't seen any change in average precipitation, but we've seen a shift away from summer into spring and winter. So summer's the growing season, when you want most of the rain. So we're seeing a shift in our precipitation into a different season of the year.
Okay, I think that's good.
Okay.